Okay, we will now hear from Commissioner Jeanne Mullgrav. Mayor Michael Bloomberg appointed Jeanne Mullgrav as Commissioner of the New York City Department of Youth and Community Development in April of 2002. As New York City's leading agency for administering youth and community programs, DYCD invests public funds in experienced community-based organizations that provide after-school programs, train young people for jobs, help immigrants achieve citizenship, and enhance individual literacy skills, among other goals. You can read the Commissioner's extensive bio, but let me just make one more point. In 2006, DYCD introduced a redesigned system for runaway and homeless youth services, which features a drop-in center in every borough, continuum of care with short and longer-term residential options, and specialized services for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and questioning youth, pregnanting and parenting youth, and sexually exploited youth. Commissioner Mullgrav.
Thank you. I am really very, very honored and delighted to be here, but there's a part of me that's quite sad. In 1989, I worked for Victim Services as its director of court programs, and also worked on a lot of the legislation that's being talked about today. In fact, I wrote an article on the statute of limitations and child sex abuse cases for St. John's, and it's quite sad to me that we are now in 2011 and we unfortunately are still talking about some of these same issues facing children. That being said, I'm glad we are still talking about them because something needs to be done, and I congratulate Brooklyn College for assembling academics, jurists, practitioners, all of you, and this esteemed panel to do so. I would be remiss if I didn't extend my gratitude to my colleagues in the state legislature. I think it was mentioned by Assemblywoman Paulin, but so many on the dais really are champions in terms of what they were able to do in such a tough budget year, restoring monies that were supporting critical issues such as runaway and homeless youth, our summer youth employment program, our youth development and delinquency monies. And without these resources, we can't begin to tackle so many of the issues that we've discussed today. So they really need to be congratulated. Unfortunately, by reading the paper, I feel like I'm going to have to be in Albany again, living in Albany again. So just keep your doors open. But really, they have been tremendous advocates on behalf of young people. My agency, the Department of Youth and Community Development, has as its primary role to fund community-based organizations. And unlike much of the discussion today, which unfortunately has been reactive, I'm proud to say that my agency does a lot of the preventive work and really gets in front of the issue. And we have the privilege to pilot new programs, to use research, to use data, and to think about programs before we have some of these terrible cases. The recession really, and the impact of the recession means that these programs are really all the more important. What we do know, of course, is that violence affects every social class and every racial group, and we know that for sure. But poverty is unfortunately linked to abuse, and I think we have to look at that, particularly as we face the numbers of 1 in 5 in New York City being poor. We also know that there is considerable overlap between domestic violence and child abuse, often occurring in the same families, that both forms of victimization, as I said, correlate not only with poverty, but the history of abuse, as well as the age of the parents. We also know that in the absence of intervention, children growing up in violent families are more likely to engage in youth violence. And finally, we know that effective strategies to combat child abuse, domestic violence, and youth violence include collaborative community-based prevention and intervention. And so that's really what I'm going to be talking about: prevention, intervention, and advocacy that is done through our nonprofits. I'll start with prevention because the vast majority of what we fund is in that area. And I'm talking about programs that emphasize positive youth development, healthy relationships, resilience, and some of you may be familiar with our Out of School Time initiative. Actually, this past Monday, we did issue an after-school initiative with $75 million dedicated toward programming in the hours between 3 and 6. Our Beacon Community Centers also are part of this portfolio. We have Cornerstone, or community centers that are based in New York City housing developments, and we have a summer service learning initiative called Teen Action. I'm not going to go through each of these programs, but some of the key features of these programs, which operate with a youth development framework, include safe and nurturing environments that support working families, supportive relationships with both adults and peers that help to build and restore the trust. That trust is important because we want to create situations where young people, if they are abused, can come to an adult, can seek help. Opportunities for youth to develop social and emotional and cognitive skills and to build resilience, and environments that very intentionally support diversity, healthy relationships, and protect them from harmful behaviors such as bullying. In fact, last week, Jeanne from the Giants visited one of our Cornerstone programs, and we talked about bullying, and that was the culmination of a curriculum that we did in all of our Cornerstone programs around anti-bullying. Perhaps the best example of some of our preventative programming is done with the Administration for Children's Services. And ACS, as you know, is really the primary agency that works around child abuse and neglect issues. But we have a program that we do and fund jointly. 15 of our Beacon Community Centers, which serve about 1,000 participants annually, include preventive services. And unlike a lot of preventive services, these services happen right in the community, right in the neighborhoods, and right in schools. And so they have a different flavor and a different way of being received in the community because they are couched. They're not stigmatizing in any way, and they also include adult programming. These programs include the regular casework, the assessment, the home visits, and the referrals, but they also have services for the entire family, so English language services, leadership programs, recreation, all under the same roof. And so this program has been in place for many, many years, and I think is a great example of two agencies whose missions come together and are aligned to provide preventive services in a community-based model. I also want to talk a little bit about intervention, since you mentioned our runaway and homeless services, and we have a continuum of services that includes both drop-in services where a young person can get assessed, can take a shower, can figure out, maybe cool off a little bit, can use a computer. We have crisis shelters, residential programs for 30 days, or 30 to 60 days really, and then we have more long-term residential services that are anywhere from 18 months and up. And that's really a continuum that supports our runaway and homeless youth, young people. We have specific services for young women who have been sexually exploited. In fact, Jeanne, who I know has been at the forefront of a lot of the legislation and is a service provider that is well recognized in this area as part of our portfolio. But we also have specialized services for teen parents, for LGBTQ youth, because we know that at the heart of what we do is to provide welcoming environments where young people can really choose where to seek services. And then the last area is really advocacy, many of our children enter into the United States without, and many of our immigrant children enter without their parents, sometimes fleeing political unrest and parental abuse, neglect, poverty, and we have legal services for young immigrants, which are very, very unusual programming that helps them make sure that they can get their legal status, also gets them connected with social services and educational programming. And we also, in that program, work with victims of illegal sex and employment trafficking. We also have another program that focuses on women who want to take advantage of the provisions in the Violence Against Women Act and who are victims of domestic violence, and along with that, support them in getting orders of protection and support them in shelter and other kinds of social service and security needs. Lastly, because I know we want to leave time for questions, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about our fatherhood program, because in our fatherhood program, which is for non-custodial parents, the goal there is reconnecting those dads with their children, and sometimes there has been instances of domestic violence, and so we're trying to find a way for them to be a contributing member of the family, but also to have a respectful relationship with the custodial parent. So thank you again for this opportunity, and I look forward.
I want to thank each of the panel members for this wonderful discussion, and we'll open up for questions now. Yes, Ms. Wiley. For anybody.
I'd like to circle back around this morning, where we saw all this astonishing research and slides and everything about epigenetics and really bringing period of development. And the prevention efforts that we've heard are wonderful. We know a lot about what to do with older kids, but until we quit feeding so many kids into the system, we're never going to make an dent in what we need to do with our older kids. There's 250,000 live births in New York State in any given year, and of those, 25% are at very high risk. And we have two programs in particular that have a very, very small foothold in New York State. And we're always, as Senator Scarborough is well aware, we're always battling to protect what we have in terms of the.
So we have the Nurse Family Partnership Program, which Dr. McEwen this morning showed us the outcomes and the results from. We also have the Healthy Families New York program, which also has good research. It's newer than NFP's research, but it's progressing very well, showing very good results. If we don't begin prenatally, during that early brain development window, during that epigenetic window, when our systems are being formed, when our brain systems are developing, we are never going to get there. And we have, at this point, we know NFP and we know that Healthy Families New York both have a very good impact on reducing abuse and neglect. NFP, for instance, shows that they reduce like 49% of early abuse and neglect with very high-risk parents. And right now in New York State, we have less than 10% of the families that desperately need these services have them even available to them, and we are constantly, every single year, having to go back and do one more round of fight to protect the programs that we have for like maybe 10,000 babies in them and families. And so I just want to say that if we look at what we learned this morning, and I deal with these issues all along the continuum, so I work knowing where the evidence-based programs are, and we know a lot along the way. At each of the ages, we know a lot about what works. But if we don't start early, we're just going to keep perpetuating what we've got. And we know a lot about what works, and so it just absolutely drives me nuts.
Yeah. Well, you want to comment? Yeah.
I want to comment. You know, when I was vague about, the governor's budget proposal, one of the proposals was to eliminate essentially the funding for the two programs that you mentioned, and we were able to restore them, not completely. But so I think that you're talking to the converted. I mean, under Diane's leadership in the Senate and all of ours in the Assembly, we will continue that fight.
It's not just that one. Amy and I both took over this committee at the same time this year, and if you've ever seen the way the budget is printed, it's a bunch of books, different sections. And if you're only looking at the section that you care about, you miss how other sections are impacting it. the governor's budget last year, quite frankly, was pitting seniors against children. You know, whether it was taking Title 20 money, which funds senior centers, shifting that to child welfare, backing out the child. Amy and I both said, well, what do you do with the child welfare money? Preventive services, gutting $85 million in programs around the state, whether it's runaway homeless youth or nurse-family partnership, and replacing it with this PIP program, which was a PIP, essentially cutting services and cutting 60% of the funding down to a $35 million. We're going to see a lot of that stuff again come next year, because while we don't have a $10.5 billion deficit, we do have a $2 billion deficit. That's assuming the feds don't screw us royally with the super committee, and the anticipation is they probably will. That's assuming there's no further downturn in the economy. So the pressure on us to cut funding is going to be as much as it was last year, but the margins are a lot tighter. And there's going to be a lot more competition for any excess revenue, whether, you know, the governor decides that he's going to extend the high earner tax or not. I personally don't think he is. But even if he did, there are a lot of other people who think that money belongs to them already. The programs that we care about are always the first to go and the last to be restored. And I think, so I started to talk to Amy about this earlier, I think what we have to start doing is take a different page. Instead of being protective of the little dollars that we have, we need to kind of change the discussion. The governor's committed to job creation right now. It's all about economic development. Well, you can't have a successful economic development program if you don't have support services for working families. Daycare, early childhood intervention, you know, out of school time, all the programs that your agency runs, many of the things that your service providers do, they help keep people in the workplace. If you have a troubled child, they need therapy. They need to have access to services. So we need to kind of change the discussion and make it all about, you know, putting money towards, you know, job creation. And job creation also means you have to support the jobs that are created.
Well, we're glad you three guys are there, let me say.
Yeah, but we're going to need you. Really, seriously. This is not going to be an easy fight.
Any other questions, comments?
I'll just echo the comment and thank the panel and Senator Scarborough and especially Commissioner Mullgrav. So I would just echo what they said, you know, and you know, if you look at research, I just want to bring up the point that, and I don't think we need research to know that children are going to do better in a family situation where they have two loving adults in a stable relationship. And so I think, you know, I commend the fatherhood initiative that's going on that's helping non-custodial parents be more involved in the lives of their children. And if you look at all the money that's spent on the separation of the family, all the money that's spent on men in prison, that's spent on disconnected youth, that's spent on women and children getting welfare, and you think about what can we do to better strengthen families, keep families together, give them, someone was saying, you know, the FAR program, and you know, can you give them that little boost to help them, to help the children stay in the family, and what can you do to keep families strong? I think that's important. And so I commend the work that's going on with child abuse and all those things, but just hope that that those things when budgeting is going on will be considered.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sir. Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. I think I can speak loud enough. So I think one of the first slides this morning had a list of the different stakeholders as far as you know, professionals, researchers, lawyers, children, all the way at the very end. And then as far as like what actually people can do about it, children were kind of reduced to this. Well, we all here need to be responsible for doing for children because children don't have the political power to do it themselves. Now, certainly the vote, understood, children don't vote, although certainly 15, 16, 17-year-olds will be future voters. There are a number of innovative programs here in the city where young people are organized to make policy change. I think the Center for Court Innovation has an excellent program in the Youth Justice Board where they bring young people together to advocate for policy change or do research on policy change regarding family court issues. I I would just, and also I know the Department of Youth and Community Development has some great programs in that regard as well. I guess I would just ask the panel, what either legislative initiatives or work do you think can be done to give young people more power in the process, either in terms of child welfare, and particularly even in the child welfare system, where regarding family court decisions or getting young people more involved in having decisions about their own life.
Anybody want to go?
Legislatively, how would we do that? I don't know. I mean, again, having worked in the system, dealing with kids who were at that adolescent age, 13, 14, who felt that they should have some say as to how their lives are going to be dealt with by the court system. It's very hard because they're children, technically, under the law. They're not supposed to have a say-so, but they really should in some respects. I guess maybe we could look at the statute and see who children technically have some input through the law guardian, right? Their law guardian is supposed to be the person that speaks for them in the court. But they're still treated like children by the system right up until they're 18. Unless something's changed, and I don't remember, so you might want to.
Commissioner?
Well, they're treated like children only if they don't commit crime.
Right.
They're 18, and that's the schizophrenia of our law. But I think even without legislation, there's a lot that's going on in terms of empowering youth to have their voice be heard. The federal fostering connections and other federal statutes mention consultation with children as being a requirement in permanency hearings, the Adoption and Safe Families Act. And we take a broad view of that. Sure, the attorney for the child can speak for the child, but many of the judges, and there's a great move on, not just here but nationally, to make sure kids actually come into court for their hearings and speak directly with the judge. And I know Judge Brian Howell was mentioned this morning as running a new pilot project in New York City where kids who are aging out of foster care come in and have extensive hearings before her. They're similar to the benchmark hearings that Judge Martin mentioned in Chicago, and they're hearings where the child and the judge and all the players engage in planning for the child's future. So I think there's a great trend, and it's an encouraging trend, and we've been doing a lot of training on it to engage kids in their court proceedings. Whenever you hear kids, and the Youth Justice Board was very articulate on this subject, as is the YIP program, Youth in Progress program of the Office of Children and Family Services. They say, if it involves me, involve me. Don't leave me out. And so I think there's a lot going on in that area, probably not necessarily legislative.
Commissioner?
Each of our Beacon programs, as you may know, have youth councils, and it's an important way of us getting feedback on which types of programs to offer. As you know, adolescents in particular will vote with their feet, and so you can be wasting resources if you're really not taking note of what they'd like. The other thing that they do is set often some of the rules, and it's always interesting that our young people are actually stricter than the adults, and so and of course when they are setting the rules, then there's a lot more buy-in, and that's exactly what you'd like. Other ways that we have elicited youth feedback is through youth surveys, and particularly in setting up our cornerstone programs in the NYCHA facilities. And most recently, I think about 2 weeks ago, Assemblyman Rodriguez had a youth forum, and those are very, very important in terms of helping young people understand democracy, what it means to participate, what it means to voice your opinions, But I think we also have to remember that we, as public officials, as elected officials, have an obligation to teach them some things. And I enjoyed going to your class, Assemblyman, because they should understand how many reams of paper the budget involves, and how a program is budgeted, and they should understand some of the ways to participate, because I think it makes them stronger advocates.
I would just add, and Commissioner Mullgrav touched on it, but the concern for me, certainly we want to get these young people involved and empowering themselves in the programs, but the concern for me is getting them involved in advocating for government, or advocating to government, and I guess expanding the people that are advocating for them. Because what is happening is, as has been said here, we're talking about vulnerable populations. Oftentimes they don't have the strength that other areas do, and we here can fight like mad for them. But other legislators are fighting just as strong for their areas, and they have stronger lobbies that are able to put pressure on the system. And so, I do teach a class at Brooklyn College, and I have been trying to tell my students how important it is to get involved in government. They often think that government doesn't affect them, and we're affecting every part of their lives. So we need to get them involved, and I think we also need to look at those people who are advocating how you can expand your reach. Maybe you have some people on your boards that are influential, that can bring things to bear. And we need to get people to understand that the interest is not just the children. Senator Savino, when she spoke at my class, made a very good point when she said that children's issues are women's issues, they're family issues, and we need to get people to understand that it's not just hurting children, it's hurting the families when you take these things away, because this fight is not going to change. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'm David Finkelhor, a child maltreatment researcher, and I have a couple of ideas I just wanted to try out on you that are suggestions for legislation that wouldn't cost much money and that would increase justice for children. One is there are a number of studies that show that the amount of time that it takes to prosecute cases that involve child victims, sex crime, and physical abuse cases where there's an adult perpetrator are inordinately long. The APA has a standard that felony prosecutions, 95% should be handled in 180 days. When there's a child victim, it almost always takes a year, frequently 2 years or more for the case to resolve. Aside from just having a goal that cases should be resolved expeditiously when they involve a child, because we have data that shows that they recover more quickly when the court case has been settled. I think there was simply a requirement that district attorneys gather and publish the amount of time that it took on average for child victim cases to resolve in this jurisdiction would have a very salutary effect. It would create a competition among the district attorneys to show that they're handling these cases expeditiously. And, I think would help children out a lot. The other suggestion I have is very illustrated by this case that we saw with the family court judge in Texas who was seen hitting his child. In the 50 states, as I understand it, in the country, as long as there was no physical harm to that child or demonstrable psychological harm, this guy could not be prosecuted. There is an exemption in all the states that prevent the prosecution of somebody if they can claim that they were administering reasonable corporal punishment. And I think this is something that state legislatures should look at, especially in the wake of this particular case, and ask themselves, is this the kind of thing that really should make someone vulnerable to an assault prosecution? And what do we need to change about our criminal statutes to restrict or eliminate this exemption that allows parents who physically assault their children and don't produce injury, but to get away without being considered for an assault?
Anybody want to comment?
I'll take a shot at it. With respect to the first question, it's kind of like the speedy trial issue. I had a recent meeting with the new commissioner, actually I had a meeting with the old commissioner before the new commissioner, where I talked about the concern we have about the permanency hearings, which kind of get in the way of the disposition of a case in the family court. They would like a speedy trial statute enacted, and we'd love to be able to do that, but I'm sure if I mentioned that to Jen, she'd say, where's the money? Problem is, we'd have to match those statutes with the resources for the court system, whether it be the criminal court system or the family court system. I think Judge Schechter had a pilot where it's speedy fact findings in neglect and abuse cases. And what happened is, for every case that went before Judge Schechter's court, got all the resources that the agency had to bear to make sure that they met the timelines, which meant other courtrooms, their caseloads piled up and they suffered. So if we're going to do it, we have to match it with money. And we then have to match it with appropriate staff. That's a problem. In my comments earlier, I mentioned that every state of the nation, corporal punishment is legal. You can beat your child, or excuse me, you can discipline your child and use physical violence against them. And then how you determine whether or not it's child abuse, I guess, is subjective. You know, it's kind of like pornography. You know what it is when you're looking at it. It's a problem. Because if we were to introduce a bill, and I'm sure any one of us here would like to outlaw corporal punishment in New York State, we would be bombarded by people who would accuse us of interfering with the most sacred relationship, that between a parent and a child.
That's not the same.
I'm not debating whether it's the same thing. I'm telling you the reality of what it is to be a legislator. So whether it isn't the same thing or not wouldn't matter. We would have church groups. We would have experts. We would have, everyone telling us we had no right to dictate how a parent disciplines their child as long as they weren't hurting them. And how do you determine when hurt is? So I'm not saying I disagree with you. I'm telling you the reality of what it would be, how hard it would be to enact a statute to outlaw physical discipline of a child in New York State, or in any other state, which is probably why it hasn't been done.
I'm not proposing a statute to outlaw corporal punishment, which I do think would face. I am proposing a statute to modify, limit, perhaps eliminate the exemption that exists in the assault provisions for reasonable corporal punishment, which still doesn't make corporal punishment a crime necessarily. It just prevents. It gives the prosecutors some greater jurisdiction, greater discretion in terms of whether they would go after someone.
Well, I think the difficulty with one thing is you have so many different factors coming in. I mean, you have a lot of people who have come here from cultures where they think that it is perfectly okay to spank or discipline their child. You have people who've grown up in certain parts of this country who think that it's perfectly okay to spank or discipline their child. And, to Senator Sabino's point, you really, what is your standard then? If the standard is not that the child is hurt, then where do you set the bar? How do you determine, within that continuum, what is a crime and what's not? And I think that would be a very sticky wicket.
I would also add, what I can't tell from your suggestion is, are you talking about a one-shot? The parent hits the child once, doesn't rise to the level of injuring the child, or are you talking about something ongoing? If it's ongoing, then I do think that we have laws that protect that child, that they're called child abuse and neglect, and I can certainly forward you those definitions. If it's an ongoing, spanking to the point of, hitting a threshold where the child might have some bruises, I would imagine that would be worthy of investigating from the point of view of ACS or CPS. So, and certainly a mandated reporter, a physician who witnessed those abuses, those bruises, or a teacher or someone close to that child, making a report. So, I don't know what kind of law, and I think that's the challenge. I hear your concern, and I think that, if you feel like there are children out there that somehow are missed in some system, I respect that, and I think that we have to look at that, but I just don't know what we would be doing here, exactly.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you for your attention. We have one last piece on the agenda here, which is beyond rhetoric and basically where do we go from here? How do we take this information and put it into some form of action in terms of policies and legislation? So if my colleagues would like, I'd like to give each of them maybe a minute to comment on where they think we should go from here, and then we
have
can.
1 minute?
Yeah.
My 1 minute, I would like to know, I don't expect you to say it here, but if there's anyone in this audience here that would believe that creating an Office of the Child Advocate that makes the governor responsible for the well-being of New York State's children, that's just a quick definition, to contact me, because I think, or to contact the governor, because he may need to know as well, because I'm not sure where people are on the issue, because I don't get any questions back about the Office of Child Advocate. But whether we're talking about budget, or whatever we're talking about, to me, the chief executive of the state of New York has to have some responsibility for the welfare of the well-being of New York State's children. So just let me know. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Where we're going. I would just say in conclusion that, you know, you're in the field, you have lots of good ideas. Never hesitate to contact any of us. My office would love to know what they are, so we could begin to, you know, go forward. Let's not get to the point of having that tragedy. You know, if there are things you know that need to be done in the system, we'd love to hear about them.
I would follow up exactly what Amy Paul said. We're going to face our challenges this year. As usual, they're going to be budget related, but the issues that children face in New York, or anywhere in this country, are with us all the time. How do we keep them safe? How do we keep them protected? How do we provide their families the resources they need? How do we provide them justice when they've been assaulted physically or sexually? How do we help them meet the challenges of this new changing technological world that places them at risks that none of us ever anticipated when the child abuse and neglect statutes were originally written? So I look forward to the next chapter in children and families, and I know it's going to be challenging but exciting.
Yes.
My name is Lauren Strom from the Brooklyn Family Defense Project, and I represent parents who have children who are being abused or abused neglect. And I just wanted to remind everyone, to the extent that we're talking about where do we go from here, that the vast, over 80% of the children in foster care will come to their families, and that if we're looking for solutions, the solutions are definitely in strengthening families and working with parents. And I really think that we should be, you know, at meetings like this, talking about, you know, working together as opposed to the children, the child being separated from the parents, although I know that in some cases their interests were adversarial. In most cases, it is the parent who cares most about that child. And there's been a lot of discussion about the relationship between poverty in these cases, and I can tell you because my office in the last 4 years has represented 3,400 parents in abuse and neglect cases, and 90% of them are poverty related. So if we're going to talk about solutions to the system, we have to talk about how to address the very concrete problems that these families have as a result of their poverty.
Okay. I would just add to the comments. We did have a joint statement that has been put together by the people who put the program together. I believe most people here signed it. I hope that there will be a chance to put some of these things into concrete action. For my part in particular, I have committed to sponsor legislation that would create a New York State Commission on Child Abuse and Violence Against Children that would, number one, tie in with the U.S. Attorney General's effort, the Defending Childhood Initiative. And secondly, I think it's necessary. I know we have any number of committees on the state level that deal with children and so on. but I don't believe that we have anything that focuses specifically on child abuse and violence against children. And what has been done is clearly not working. I mean, I was drawn to this chart that was put on our chairs, I believe it was by Every Child Matters, but it points out that in the last 8 or 9 years, in just about every one of the major states, child abuse and neglect deaths are going up, and going up by huge numbers. In New York, there was 78 in 2001. In 2008, there were 107. In Florida, there were 91 in 2001. In 2008, there were 185. In California, there were 30 in 2001. In 2008, there were 185. So clearly what we're doing is not working because more kids are dying, and that needs to be addressed. So that's one thing that I'm certainly looking to do on a concrete basis. And I would just suggest, and I think a number of us has said this, you guys probably have the best ideas. And I know there were a lot of really good information. I didn't see everything, but the things that I saw were very valuable and you know, I think would be things that could be translated into policy or legislation. I would suggest that maybe those ideas can be put together in terms of the meetings or some sort of memo, and that we then come back in a smaller working group. Maybe the Children's Studies Department can pull together a smaller working group with some of the legislators here and talk about how we can make those into concrete legislation or policy initiatives that we can follow through on. Because certainly, I think Senator Savino made the point that we often end up doing legislation by reaction, and we have here, I think, a vast cross-section of people who have the knowledge and can help us to take those ideas and put them into concrete action. So I would certainly commit to working with you if you put that together. And lastly, let me say this for everybody on the panel here, if you need to reach any of these members, I'm certainly sure that they would be glad to hear from you. If you need to reach any of the assembly members, you can just Google New York State Assembly, and the member's name and information is right there. The same thing, you can Google New York State Senate. If you want to reach Commissioner Mullgrav, you can put in nyc.gov, go to city agencies, and go to her agency, and we'd be glad to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This concludes our long day of hard work and lots of important information. And I'd like to thank everybody who participated. But as the Assemblyman just said, this was not just a conference. That's not why I put myself out for a year almost. Trying to get this together, but this was something in order to a start to move forward from here together. And so I hope you will join us, and we have already, as we hear, the Assemblyman will introduce legislation for the establishment of a New York State Commission on Child Abuse and Violence Against Children. The National Coalition of Juvenile and Family Court Judges have already signed, with the help of the Honorable Judge Martin, the statement. So we're trying to get entire organizations behind it. Like, for instance, the District Attorney Hines signed it, and the suggestion was made that the New York State Bar Association should come out in favor of it, and so that we really begin to aggregate the forces rather than go forward in the fragmented fashion as we have. I thank you very much indeed. All of us thank you, and especially the children thank you, and young people who are adversely affected. And have a very good weekend. And you know how to be in touch with us. You have our folder, you have our email address, and also on our website, all the documents, the speeches, everything will be published on the website. Pardon? On the conference website, they will put a link already. Sorry? There's a conference website in the program. Yeah, the conference website is in the program. You'll find the bios of all the speakers. You'll find already articles added to this, bibliographies, and more will come. We get all these speeches and put them up, right? Thank you very much again for coming and for all your